There's a reason you think about the one person you shouldn't. A reason the thought of crossing a line feels more alive than staying within it. We don't just fantasize about the forbidden because we're broken, perverse, or immoral. We do it because desire is wired to dance with danger. The philosopher Georges Bataille once said, "Eroticism is assenting to life even in death." In other words, the closer we move to what threatens us, socially, morally, emotionally, the more alive we sometimes feel. The forbidden is electric. It pulsates with risk, secrecy, and the thrill of being seen in ways we're not supposed to be seen. And the paradox? It's often not about the act itself, but the idea, the possibility, the trespass of it. There's a reason locked doors fascinate us, not because of what's behind them, but because we're told we can't go in. What makes something erotic is often not its pleasure, but its danger, its risk, its impossibility. We fantasize about what we shouldn't want: affairs, strangers, power imbalances, the MILF, the boss, the taboo. We crave the things that might ruin us, because somewhere deep down, we think they might also complete us. But why? Why do so many of our sexual fantasies orbit what society calls wrong? Why are we drawn to stories of forbidden love, secret liaisons, and transgressive desire? This isn't just about sex, it's about control, identity, power. Sometimes, we want what we shouldn't because it gives us a break from who we're supposed to be. The good girl, the nice guy, the loyal spouse, the stable parent. We fantasize about the forbidden because it lets us become someone else, someone bolder, freer, less restrained. But where does that leave us in our real lives? Are we betraying our values, or are we uncovering truths too raw to express out loud? Let's explore. But before we label these fantasies as betrayals, we need to ask, what are they really saying? Fantasies are emotional X-rays. They reveal what we're missing, not just in our sex lives, but in our emotional and psychological landscapes. They're not always wishes we want fulfilled. Sometimes, they're metaphors. Sometimes, they're the language of unmet needs we don't yet know how to name. A fantasy about a stranger might not be about infidelity. It might be about novelty, about being seen, not as a parent or partner or provider, but as a mystery. A fantasy about dominance might not be about violence. It might be about surrender, relief, the desire to be free of control, decisions, burdens. The fantasy of the forbidden isn't always a cry for chaos. It's often a cry for aliveness. And society doesn't make it easy. We're taught to desire responsibly, to want only what is good, acceptable, and safe. But desire isn't polite. It doesn't care about your reputation. It isn't interested in your values. It doesn't live inside your moral framework. It lives in the shadows. And the more we suppress it, the more it surfaces, disguised, distorted, and often louder than before. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." The forbidden becomes larger than life precisely because we bury it. The more unacceptable something is, the more charged it becomes. That's the irony. Repression fuels obsession. This doesn't mean we should act on every impulse, but it does mean we should listen, because buried beneath those fantasies are often parts of ourselves we've disowned. The wild parts, the curious parts, the parts that long to break free from performance and propriety. So what happens when we finally listen? Sometimes, nothing. Sometimes, just acknowledging the fantasy is enough. It loses its grip once it's seen. Other times, it changes us. We start asking harder questions. Why do I feel so alive in my imagination, but so numb in real life? Why do I crave danger to feel desire? Why do I need secrecy to feel seen? Desire and danger have always danced together. But maybe the point isn't to separate them. Maybe it's to understand their rhythm. To ask, what is this fantasy asking of me? What part of me is still starving? Because the forbidden isn't just a destination. It's a mirror. And what it reflects is rarely just about sex. It's tempting to think that our fantasies are deviations, glitches in our programming. But what if they're not? What if they're maps? Not of who we are now, but of who we might be if we stripped away the shame? Think about it. We live in a world that punishes certain thoughts, fantasizing about the forbidden, the older woman, the dominant man, the stranger, the teacher, the ex, the same sex. It doesn't matter how common these thoughts are. What matters is how hidden they have to be, not because they're unnatural, but because they threaten the stories we've been told about what we're supposed to want. But here's the truth. What is socially acceptable and what is psychologically authentic are often two very different things. Your fantasy might not align with your values, and that's okay, because fantasies aren't moral contracts. They're internal symbols. They're the subconscious trying to speak a language you'll understand. A young man who fantasizes about being used by an older woman isn't necessarily craving humiliation. He might be craving maternal affection, intimacy without pressure, a return to vulnerability, dressed up in the only costume his adult brain can interpret. A woman who dreams about being dominated may not want to be hurt, but to feel free, for once, from always being the one in control. And here's the paradox. We fantasize about power plays because we often feel powerless in real life. Desire, in its rawest form, often reveals our deepest imbalances. If your life is all about being good, stable, kind, and responsible, don't be surprised if your desires take you somewhere dark, chaotic, and primal. That's not dysfunction. That's balance trying to happen. That's the psyche looking for symmetry. So the fantasy about breaking rules, about being used, about doing what you shouldn't, it's not necessarily about rebellion. It's often about relief. Relief from the performance of goodness. Relief from the burden of being in control. Relief from the endless emotional labor of being the one who never asks for anything raw or messy. This is why some of the most forbidden fantasies are actually about release, not conquest. We want to let go. We want to be undone. And yet, we're terrified to admit it, because we live in a culture that confuses desire with intention, that if you fantasize about something, it means you want it, in real life, in literal terms. But that's not how the unconscious works. The unconscious is metaphorical, symbolic, emotional. It speaks in poetry, not policy. A fantasy about cheating is often not about betrayal, but about freedom, about the parts of you that feel stuck, the parts of you that miss risk, the parts of you that ache to be wanted again. A fantasy about being degraded? It might be the only place you allow yourself to stop performing strength. None of this means you should act on your fantasies, but it does mean you should respect them, because inside every forbidden thought is a clue about the self, the hidden self, the repressed self, the truest self, the one who doesn't care what they're supposed to want, only what they do. And that's where things get complicated, because once you start listening to that voice, really listening, you can't go back. You can't unknow what you know about your own hunger. You can't pretend to be satisfied with the sanitized version of desire that society offers you. And maybe that's the most forbidden thing of all. Not the fantasy itself, but the refusal to feel shame about it. The hardest part isn't having forbidden fantasies. It's living in a world that tells you to be afraid of them. From religion to romance movies, school to sex education, we're taught to seek safety, predictability, clean, neat desire that fits inside the box of social acceptability. We're told that if we're healthy, we won't crave anything that threatens the norm. But what if health isn't the absence of taboo, but the courage to understand it? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is what fantasies do. They press on the bruise of your unconscious. They tell you what you long for, not what's polite or safe or marketable, but what's real. And they do it through metaphor, through the unspoken. You dream of being taken, of crossing lines, of surrendering, of dominating, not because you're broken, but because your psyche is trying to integrate what your conscious mind has pushed away. What makes something forbidden is rarely about the act itself. It's about what that act symbolizes. And often, it symbolizes freedom, or truth, or rebellion, or a hunger to feel something more intense than the dull ache of daily life. And here's the problem. Most people never examine their fantasies deeply. They either suppress them, locking them away like monsters in a basement, or they act them out blindly without reflection. Both paths are dangerous. Suppression turns desire into shame. Shame festers. It leaks out in self-sabotage, in numbness, in a feeling of quiet deadness you can't explain. Acting out, on the other hand, without understanding, risks destroying things that matter to you. Relationships, integrity, your own self-respect. So what's the alternative? To face your forbidden fantasies head on, not as commands, but as messengers. Ask them, what are you trying to show me? What am I not letting myself feel? Where have I traded aliveness for approval? What parts of me have I locked away just to be loved? Fantasies about the forbidden aren't signs of moral decay. They're signs of your deeper self trying to wake you up. They're fire alarms for the soul. They're the voice that says, there's more to you than this performance. There's more to want than what you've been taught. This is not about giving in to every dark craving. This is about honoring the complexity of your inner world. It's about understanding that desire is rarely pure. It's messy, tainted, laced with contradiction, and that's what makes it honest. To fantasize about the forbidden is not to betray who you are. It's to meet the edges of your own identity. The priest who dreams of lust, the married woman who craves chaos, the nice guy who longs to be worshipped, the strong one who secretly wants to be overpowered. These aren't failures. These are truths in conflict, and every human being lives at that intersection between the self they show and the self they suppress. The question is, can you look at both versions of yourself without flinching? Because the forbidden only holds power over you when you hide from it. The moment you look directly at your own desire with honesty, curiosity, even compassion, it starts to lose its grip. You stop being controlled by what you won't name. In the end, your fantasies are not your enemy. They are your teachers. And the forbidden? That's just another word for the parts of you you're afraid to face. But freedom, real freedom, begins the moment you do.